Clean drinking water is a fundamental human need. In the United States, it's also a federally protected right. Since 1974, the EPA's Safe Drinking Water Act has been in place to protect against industry pollutants like lead, nitrates, and phosphorus. But there's something else in the water, a group of nearly 5,000 synthetic chemicals known as perfluoalkyl substances, or PFAS. Since the late 1940s, they have silently but surely been polluting our water, air, soil, and bodies. Despite the federal government knowing about the risks of PFAS for decades, today, the Safe Drinking Water Act still has no enforceable limits on PFAS. PFAS are oil, stain, and water repellent chemicals used to make nonstick pans, outdoor gear, firefighting foam, medical supplies, and more. Invented by DuPont in 1937, PFAS are called forever chemicals because they don't break down in humans, animals, or the environment. Tests show PFAS are present in 98% of humans. Hundreds of studies show that PFAS build up in the body over time and have numerous negative health effects.
Now, almost every American has PFAS coursing through their blood after generations of use of these drugs in our modern society. The EPA has understood the risks posed by PFAS since 1998. The FDA has understood the risks since the 1960s. But we still do not have a strong federal policy to combat these forever chemicals, which are a crisis.
3M began mass-producing PFAS at its plant overlooking the Mississippi River in Cottage Grove, Minnesota in 1947. 3M knew as early as 1950 that PFAS were toxic, but kept it secret. 3M kept making PFAS and disposing of them carelessly, with the resulting waste runoff creating a massive hidden health hazard in the Twin Cities drinking water. Over the next decades, this problem repeated at industrial sites of multiple manufacturers across the country, as well as with PFAS in consumer products and firefighting foams at military bases and airports. The EPA was finally alerted in 1998 to a 3M study showing the longevity of PFAS, and in 2000 they successfully pressured 3M to stop making PFAS and PFOA, two of the most common and toxic chemicals in the PFAS family. 3M did not admit liability and still claims those products were safe. However, the EPA did not issue any regulations or guidance about how industry could safely produce or dispose of PFAS. In 2009, the Safe Drinking Water Act identified some PFAS to be evaluated for potential regulation. 7 years later, the EPA established an unenforceable health advisory level for PFAS and PFOA in drinking water. States that want strict enforceable limits have to pass their own laws and pursue their own cleanup funding. In 2018, Minnesota sued 3M for environmental damages, and the $850 million settlement is now funding water treatment and cleanup for impacted communities. But without enforceable federal rules,
what's to stop this from happening somewhere else in a state that's not as stringent with rules and regulations, or aren't willing to hold businesses or people accountable for, what happened many, many years ago?
Federal regulatory support would also help state agencies working to detect, evaluate, and regulate PFAS, a huge challenge since there are nearly 5,000 kinds of complex PFAS chemicals.
And so understanding the health effects, the environmental effects, how they react in the environment, how you can maybe dispose of them or break down the chemical bonds is difficult.
But positive progress is finally happening. In 2021, the EPA and Biden administration issued an action plan focusing on testing, research, and remediation. It would also establish enforceable PFAS limits under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Separately, in July 2021, the House of Representatives passed the Bipartisan PFAS Action Act. If passed in the Senate,
this bill sets a deadline for the EPA to take action on establishing standards, limits the introduction of new PFAS into the commerce and in the environment, and provides support for communities to install treatment technologies.
The bill would require the EPA to designate PFAS as hazardous substances under the Superfund law, allowing states to hold polluters accountable for cleanup. Unsurprisingly, PFAS manufacturers have lobbied hard to defeat the bill, hoping to avoid industry restrictions, expensive legal action, and liability for cleanup. The water sector is also concerned that as currently structured, the bill would force massive cleanup costs onto water utilities and taxpayers. Others oppose regulating PFAS as a class.
We need science-grounded, risk-based approach that identifies the most harmful chemical and treats them as such, rather than have Congress regulate the entire family as a single group.
After more than 70 years since PFAS started polluting our nation's water, there is finally potential for stricter regulations in the Safe Drinking Water Act. Still, there are no quick or easy solutions.
It's a forever chemical, and it's going to be something that, my generation has come to terms with, that we should be doing something about it, but it'll be your generation and future generations with this forever chemical that'll be learning more about it and trying to reduce any negative effects in the future from it.